National Educational Television presents At Issue, a weekly commentary on events and people in the news. This week, At Issue looks at the Senate and Politics, 1964. The commentator is Sidney Hyman, political historian and author of The American President.
The Senate will soon be back here in Washington to resume work on bills left in suspense at the Christmas time recess. But it will resume that work under the shadows cast by two central facts. First, the political moratorium imposed by President Kennedy's death is over, and the voice of partisan political criticism can be expected to be heard in the land once more. At the same time, the need our political parties have to position themselves for the 1964 presidential election will no doubt leave its mark on the legislative records to be made in the session ahead. Now, these two facts raise pointed political questions about the prospective conduct of Senate Democrats and Republicans. Will the Democrats, for example, help President Lyndon Johnson establish his personal clarity of line as a new leader? Will they help him hold the national coalition he has inherited from President Kennedy? Will the Senate Republicans, on their part, lead the search for a presidential candidate around which the national elements of the party can coalesce? Will they give him a distinctive legislative record on which to stand? Or will Senate Republicans and Democrats alike, and especially those who face re-election contests of their own, pursue a go-it-alone politics without regard to the need of their respective national parties? To get a feel for the way these and other questions might be answered in the session we face, I have with me in the Senate committee room Senator John Sherman Cooper, Republican of Kentucky, and Senator Eugene McCarthy, Democrat of Minnesota. Senators Cooper and McCarthy are men who respect the integrity of the words they use when they explain themselves. And on this count alone, I am delighted to have them with me. What do you anticipate will be the main legislative fights in the session ahead and the outcome of those fights? Civil rights, for example.
I think we have the same major issues before us that will be before us next year. One will be, of course, civil rights legislation, and I think the tax bill. To me, they loom up larger than others at this time.
What do you anticipate the result of a civil rights fight?
I believe that if we can take up the bill early enough in the session, that a civil rights bill will be passed.
Do you think this will be taken up, incidentally, prior to the tax bill or subsequent to it?
Well, I think this remains a great unanswered question, and I don't know as to how the leadership could anticipate scheduling these two bills. If action in the House on civil rights comes relatively soon, why we'll be really under, I think, severe pressure in the Senate to try to get it up as quickly as we can. If action is somewhat delayed in the House, I'd be hopeful that we might take some action on the tax bill. And my hope would be that we could act on the tax bill very early in the session and have that cleared away so that when civil rights came on, there wouldn't be the pressure to compromise that bill or to try to pressure it through too soon or too quickly because of the need to pass the tax bill and to make it retroactive, because the longer the delayed action on the tax bill, the more difficult it will be to have its features retroactive, and I think it important that the tax cut begin to run in the American economy as early as possible in the year 1964.
Do you see the fate of President Johnson's re-election hinging in any way upon the fate of these two bills?
Well, I don't know. I thought, John, it's a little early, isn't it?
Yes, and naturally, I'm out of President Johnson's party. I think this question of civil rights is going to affect the political position of the president, and it will affect the political position of the Republican nominee, whoever he may be, and our parties. So it does play an important part.
It is a fact, though, that both of these are what are considered the two major issues now are not in the strict sense partisan.
That's correct.
This is especially true of civil rights, where I think that the political issue will be one of a kind of contest on the part of each party to claim greater credit for what is done. In the case of the tax bill, this moves from taxes over to the question of the economy, and I suppose there's a partisan temptation in each case with the civil rights. And I don't think this was unreasonable partisanship. I think that after President Johnson took office, the almost immediate, it wasn't just Democrats, it was more or less the press began to talk about how he was a man who got things done. When you set that against the image that the press had set up, in part we deserved it, of the Congress as being a Congress which wasn't moving, if immediately we had acted on these two measures, why what they had said about the president would have been, at least would appear to have been confirmed. And I think that had I been a Republican at that point, I would have said, well, now, since the fate of the nation is really not involved in especially the civil rights bill, immediately we can take this up next year and consider it. That perhaps we shouldn't go along and help to create an image of the man who is the Democratic president, who will be the Democratic candidate, as a fellow who comes in and immediately gets Congress to do exactly what he wants to do. With reference to this,
I don't believe the Republican Party made such a decision.
I don't think it would have been out of order, John, to say we'll slow this down just a little bit.
When President Johnson became president, and we were very near the end of the session, and I think it was a practical impossibility to get.
Yeah, Charlie Halleck said just about this, though. He said, we'll get it to you in January. Don't get excited now, or just about those words. And I don't say this was inordinate or improper, a partisan position, if it was a partisan
I don't
position.
believe it was. I'll have to say that.
And I have a question, intrude here. You both served in the Senate at the time President Johnson was majority leader, and while, of course, he was operating on the Democratic side. I was wondering whether you have noticed anything in the brief time he has been president. Has he used any of the tactics that he used as majority leader, as president? Do you notice anything, any similarity, any changes?
Well, he was a great man to use the telephone when he was a majority leader,
and
he certainly uses the telephone now. Other than that, I don't know. John could speak on this. As a leader, he consulted with people, both Republicans and Democrats, and certainly this was true, I think, early in the administration of President Kennedy, too, that this kind of consultation, it's more a characteristic, I think, of the early stages of any administration. So to say this is a marked contrast with, let us say, the early months of the Kennedy administration or the early months of the Eisenhower administration, I couldn't say. But there's no question but what there has been a great deal of consultation. And
I should think that at one point, sorry, Senator Cooper.
Well, as I said, I did not have as close association with him as the Democrats would have, but just watching President Johnson move when he was majority leader, he was a man of tremendous activity, talking to people all the time, and talking to you Democrats all the time about legislation.
We talked to a lot of Republicans.
And also, I would say at the time, I would see him move over
that's right.
on the Republican side. And in a way, I think what he's been doing is in that activity, consultation, is a great deal like he worked in the Senate.
I've often wondered, though, at what point the division of power reasserts itself. There is a different perspective from a presidential point of view and a senatorial point of view, and I have a feeling that at some point or other, perhaps this difference will assert itself as it did in the early days, as it did during President Truman's presidency.
Well, I suppose I don't know whether it's a matter of reasserting or if it's being reasserted. Certainly what's happened in dealing with the authorization and the appropriation for foreign aid in the weeks immediately following President Johnson's coming into office indicated that the Congress was really not immediately laying down its arms or abandoning every field, that this did continue immediately in critical areas, and I'm sure that it will continue as we go on into this session in those areas in which the differences really, they're historic in part, and in part they're I suppose, procedural differences between areas of conflict between the executive branch of the government and the Congress do exist.
Senator Cooper, leaving the question of President Johnson to one side, we were reading in the papers that Senator Goldwater was the front-running candidate for the Republican nomination, and that he has slipped substantially, and the Republicans seem to be casting about for some kind of formula with which to go into the 1964 presidential contest. Do you have any thoughts on this subject as to how can you win this contest, and where do you look for your candidate?
Well, it's quite difficult to speculate on the decisions that may be taken in months ahead. I think what I say about this has been said so many times in the press and by a number of people. I think there's a difference between the problem of nominating a candidate and then the factors which go to make a winning candidate. I think Senator Goldwater has had strong support from those who would likely be delegates to the convention. He may still have that support. I do not know. I think there's been a change as far as the hopes of the Republicans for the South. I think it'd be natural to believe that with the first Southerner as president for 100 years, that he will be more likely to get electoral votes from some of the states that the late President Kennedy might not have received. I can't say. Civil rights may still play its part. But I always felt that while I know there are great changes taking place in the South, I think, and the Republican Party is advancing, I've always thought that to base the success of the Republican Party in the South upon an anti-civil rights position could not be a successful position in the country. And it's not a correct position either. So I do believe that there will be attention now, and there is being attention given to other possible candidates, and Senator Goldwater. I believe, well, my colleague is named at times, Senator Morton, Kentucky. I think Governor Scranton is a man that Republicans will look at very carefully, and he seems to have geographical position, large state, governor of a large state. He has a strong Republican background, served in the Congress, young, attractive man. I believe that while he doesn't appear very high on the polls now, I believe you'll probably see him go up.
You think he may do better than a Pennsylvanian who lived there but a short time, a few years back, who tried for the Republican nomination, John? And
you mean your
former governor of Minnesota?
Governor. Yes, I think so. He's a new man.
I wish you would comment on this critique that was made by the Goldwater supporters that the reasons why the Republicans have lost preceding elections, presidential elections, is because they have followed a Me Too tactics. They've tried to imitate the Democrats, and that the way to win the presidential election is to sharpen the issues in the hope that you would bring out the conservative vote. Does this make any sense to you?
Well, you got into my own beliefs about what the Republican Party is or should be. I don't know that it's held by all the Republicans. I think the fact is that in every convention, at least since the war, or since 1940, that the Republican Party has made that choice at conventions, and they have always selected a candidate who some have charged to be a Me Too candidate, and including President Eisenhower. My own judgment is that the party has to look at the problems that the country faces, and if on some issues we agree with the Democrats because they are national issues, I don't see that that is a fault. I do believe there are differences in the two parties which could be sharpened.
We complain occasionally, you know, when you take over issues which were once ours alone and endorse them, but it is a fact that there's no such thing as a special copyright or special claim to an issue or to a program once it becomes a part of the public domain. If this were the case, you'd have trouble with TVA.
We claim that about you, too, you know, that now you're taking over our economy program. And I've noticed more Democrats in this last session preaching economy. And we think civil rights, too,
Well,
began with the Republican Party, you know.
You abandoned it, though. We kind of picked it up after it had been abandoned by most of the Republicans.
No. We passed the first.
But I quite agree with what you said, John, about what it would be a bad thing for the country and certainly for the Republicans if they are making a recovery in the South to base it upon what is traditionally and historically in opposition to the position upon which the Republican Party was really upon which it was built and born.
At least that Lincoln took the position that slavery is a national issue. Stephen Douglas, it was a state matter, and I don't think the Republican Party can take that position on civil rights.
Senator Cooper, I seem to be throwing the burden of proof upon you, but the Democrats have, in a sense, their problem simplified when they have a president in the White House, or any party that has a president in the White House has the president, in a sense, become the symbol of the party and speaks for the party. A party that does not control the presidency has a difficult time finding a unitary voice to speak for it. Ostensibly, it's the record that the party makes within the legislature. Would you agree with this? I mean, how do you solve this problem at this point, from the Republican point of view?
Well, there's any question. It's pretty difficult when you're out of power to bring together the organization and I would say even the funds which they need in campaigns beside the issue. But I believe that if you want to look at the record now of the last Congress, there's some signs that it's made what could be called a Republican record. There's been more emphasis, for example, upon reducing expenditure. I think that came largely from the country, but it has certainly been a clear policy of the Republican Party, and it has been adopted by quite a number of the Democrats. And then again, I think that even on the issue of civil rights, and I want to say that you said a minute ago, Eugene, that support and opposition cuts across both parties, but the Republican Party is not split sectionally on that at least, and that should give us a stronger position on that issue, although it shouldn't be just purely a political issue.
We could argue
I
this
think
one.
on defense that our positions are pretty much the same.
I think you're kind of making, this is why I didn't mind, Sidney, you're throwing the burden on Senator Cooper, because he generally makes the case for the Democrats, you see. This, if you can have a Republican doing that, why it's helpful. I think he said that if we do make this kind of record on the field of economy and in that area, a kind of Republican record, why it would be even more difficult for the Republicans to make a case against the Democratic administration which had made a Republican record.
I think the voters are
How much is
intelligent,
this,
you know,
how much is
they
this
can
talk,
look through.
talk of economy? Is this real, or is this kind of a ceremonial talk? How do you evaluate this?
Well, I must say that I believe in the last 2 years, it seems to me there's been more concern about it than I'd seen in previous years.
Realistically,
it
can
comes
you cut
from
back?
the people generally and down through all levels. Well, you look at the budget in many ways, from the standpoint of income, gross national product in many ways, and with a growing nation, why, of course, we know that many things are going to cost more. Defense is going to cost the same, maybe more. I think it's pretty difficult to cut back very deep, but yet this Congress, the last Congress, they already claiming they've cut $4 billion. I don't know. We'll have to wait to see how it works out.
Well,
We have missed, not referred rather, to aid to education, and the public schools rather, and to Medicare. Do you believe these things are issues you can almost forget about in the next election?
well, I think
will decide the legislative schedule, but
that's right. I would think that the record on education, which has been made in this first session, is a substantial one, and it might be as much as the Democrats would attempt to carry into the next campaign. It's not a matter of putting off the other because they say we've got to do it a little bit at a time, but because it is extremely controversial. There'll be a question of time in the next session of Congress, and And we have adopted a significant educational program in, well, 3 areas: higher education and vocational education, medical education, and I suppose you could include the bill to help retarded children and persons as a 4th. I do think that the issue of medical care for the aged will be an issue in the campaign, either because of what has been done about it or because of what hasn't been done about it, or simply in terms of what your position on it may be. But I do think there'll have to be some kind of a showdown, whether it's complete and whether it is one that's gone through all the proper processes of the committees and so on. I don't know, but I think that sometime in the next session, certainly in the Senate, there will be, either by way of amendment on a bill, there will be a medical care program proposed and acted upon. There will be a record, I think.
I take it that, again, at one point in the preceding years, there were some signs that Cuba would perhaps be an issue of the 1964 campaign. Is your judgment that it would no longer be, Senator Cooper?
I think it will be discussed. It'll be an issue. Of course, the strength of the issue, I think, would depend a great deal, too, upon any events that might happen.
Well, I think,
Cuba before the election.
Yeah,
it could happen any time.
If there's a flare-up, it could become a very important issue. If not, I think the 2 things. One, of course, the fact that the issue had leveled off a little bit anyway, and then secondly, of course, the assassination of President Kennedy cast a somewhat different light on. You almost have to have it revived by some force which is outside the United States in order to have it be a really weighty issue in the campaign, I would think.
I think it will still be an issue for these reasons. The problems in Latin America, Soviet aid to Cuba, presence of Soviet troops in Cuba, whatever they may be, keep it alive and bring to mind the point that for the first time the Soviet Union has established a presence in the Western Hemisphere and has made Latin America, I think, one of the most difficult problems in the world, one of the most important not to them and to us. So I don't see how you can escape this problem of Cuba.
Do you see any new initiatives being taken in the next year, next session rather, with respect to the whole area of disarmament? Or do you think we've gone as far as we can for the time being? And
my thinking and it's speculation that from a practical matter, with the approval of the Test Ban Treaty, that probably gone about as far as you can in the year. I think many people want to see how the test ban worked, and I would think if there are any possibilities of improvement, relations, the Soviet Union, it might be in other areas, political, Germany or Berlin, some political area. What do you think?
I would think that this would be the next area of action, not necessarily reducing conventional strength, but in the area of perhaps drawing troops back in certain areas, or a better arrangement regarding Berlin. What would be offered in exchange for it, I don't know, but I think the pressure is off really on both sides, those who are opposed to a test ban and those who are for it in this general area for the immediate future. I don't see anything on the horizon really. We didn't see the test ban really, except that we've been talking about it for 5 or 6 years and talking in that area, and there's nothing else really that we've been talking about to the same extent and for the same length of period in the area of conflict right now that's comparable at all.
I would just think it work on the problem of underground testing.
Mm-hmm. I was just wondering whether there could be any possible new initiatives. What does this mean, the series of speeches that have been made about by our State Department officials with respect to China? Is this merely a restatement of an old position, or does this represent any new nuance in American policy?
Well, there was some conflict in speeches. I think Mr. Hilsman made a speech which seemed to indicate that we were open for at least, I don't know, some movements although Secretary Rusk then made a speech which seemed to confirm our present position that we thought it was, we were talking about the breach between Communist China and Russia. I don't see anything happening in that area because I don't think that we want to, and I don't think Communist China wants to.
Well, even if the Hillsman speech were interpreted as a kind of an opening, the kind of thing that he suggested as a sign of goodwill and good intent on the part of the Chinese, if we got to measuring it in terms of what we would consider, at least the Congress had considered a response, it would be the kind of step which I don't think anybody could expect the Red Chinese to take in the very immediate future.
Would you say, though, that at least you're beginning to talk about China again? At one period, it seemed to me that this was sort of a taboo subject, that the positions were frozen, and you had a certain orthodoxy developing about the subject of the United States' relationship to China, and to find the subject raised again in any particular form does seem, from an outsider's point of view, to represent a kind of an unfreezing of attitudes. Do you think this is right or wrong?
Well, I don't know whether I'd go that far, Sidney. I think there are two things. One, that the passage of time really bears upon this, and the second is whatever substance there is to it, the talk about a rift between the Russians and the Chinese, and whenever something of that's abroad, I think there's always a tendency to begin to think about a possible course of action. But whether this thinking about it has really moved to a point where there's any hope or anticipation of positive action, I don't know. I remember during the Eisenhower administration, someone in the State Department was severely criticized, John, because he was asked at a press conference, I've forgotten who it was, wasn't the Secretary of State, it was someone below that, where they were considering I think it was the recognition of Red China, and he said, well, we think about it, and the press said that the administration was considering, because they were thinking about, well, they were thinking about it in terms of, as anybody would, what would the alternatives be and what the consequences be. And I think that this talk about the relationship with the Red Chinese at the present time is in about that same category. Once in a while you say, now, wouldn't it be nice if, if this happened and all of these things followed from it, but you really start from the things you'd like to have follow and then move back and say, if all of these things were to happen, then we might do this. It's kind of reversing history, and we're doing that for you here a little bit in this discussion, kind of writing it in advance for him.
Well, maybe the will to believe can force the proof that the belief is correct.
Well, if it happens, why, we'll claim special credits.
Well, I want to thank you both very much for joining me in this discussion, and we will now see whether we are good or bad prophets.
Right. Thank you very much.